being able to, and this is what we kind of as a group have come together and chosen to embrace and to participate in, is the fact that we can make a difference and that we can be the leaders in our own families, in our own lives, in our communities. And I can attest as I look at all of you, I'm standing in the presence of leaders that are going to be making a difference and are making a difference. So I brought up the fishing pictures of some good times that we had in Alaska. Okay, where'd Lincoln go?
Over here.
Oh, you have to get over there. Let's be over here. Okay, I need you over here. I can't even see over there. My eyes are getting bad enough that I can't even see without the lights on. We all know the old adage that says, if you give a man a fish, finish that for me. He eats for a day. If you teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. That is the principle that we can embrace and we should embrace. And without participation, we're kind of like the planners in the architect's office that come up with great ideas, but they may not make anything come to fruition. The people that make it happen are the people that I see in this room. And what we would like to do as a group, and why we have come together as the DR, for short, or the Deseret Republic, is we want to enlarge the efforts of what we're doing by networking with people who share a similar vision and a similar belief. That it is only through our own efforts, in the sense of being self-reliant, that we can provide true charity and give back to our communities. If we perceive, as many of the planners, architects of the day, that they can simply set up a framework of ideas and then pass laws to force us to embrace those ideas, we have lost the purpose of what we're about. Now, so I want to talk about this principle, and I actually want to talk about principles in general. Oftentimes we talk about principles without really grasping what exactly the principles are. We talk about principles of good government. We talk about principles of farming. We talk about principles of beekeeping. We talk about principles of salesmanship. Principles of, what's another principle that you're all familiar with?
Teaching.
Principle of teaching. Principle of leadership. Principle of whatever it is. What is exactly a principle? A principle, and again, kind of going back to the teach a man, or give a man a fish, eats for a day, teach a man to fish, eats for a lifetime. The principle is what liberates our souls. And if we can incorporate the principles that are good, that enable us to truly be independent and free, then we have the capacity to teach those and share those and help others. Now, I think it goes without saying that the principles of self-reliance, the educational tools that help bring that about, are kind of in a little bit of a vacuum right now. So, one thought that I had that I thought might tie in well is to explain that within this room there are a multitude of different sets of skills. When you learn a skill, I don't care if it's a trade to do a construction trade, or whether it is a computer's trade skill, or whether it's whatever it is.
Homemaking.
When you can find a skill that you can develop well and make it available to others, you'll never go hungry. And you will always have a means by which you can help other people. A lot of people right now are a little bit alarmed let people see, that there's a bright light, a possible light at the end of the tunnel, which I hope we could all have some optimism. The reality is, and I think many of us recognize, that when you have $15 trillion of national debt, and you've got laws being passed as recent as yesterday, empowering our federal government to have the tool to take into custody citizens of the United States as prisoners of war without a jury of their trial, or a jury of their peers, we got some complications that teach us that we need to get back to some of the wisdom of those who have gone before us. We've kind of been, we're the recipients, or we're the beneficiaries of some generations that have been asleep at the wheel. And I'm not blaming anybody specifically, but the reality is we are where we're at. So the principle that I want to teach tonight has to do with resources. What is the most, what resources is it that we use to transact most of our business? Give me some. What's the resources that we most often?
Money.
The almighty dollar.
Okay, money. All right. So who in your mind are the great teachers of money in this generation?
Dave Ramsey.
Who?
Dave Ramsey.
Dave Ramsey. Okay, I got to look up here. Dave Ramsey. Good. What's another one? Who's one of the great financial gurus of the time?
Ben Bernanke. Okay, I'm just kidding.
I'll test you a little bit. Let's see if our minds are thinking on the same wavelength. Who's one of the wealthy people of the nation that's...
Oh,
Okay, Warren Buffett.
Mr. Buffett. Mr. Buffett.
Mr. Buffett. All right.
Mr. Buffet.
Who else? Who else can you think
Bill Gates, yeah.
Okay. Anybody heard the name Nelson, or not Nelson, but John D. Rockefeller?
Oh, yeah.
Anybody familiar with what he did? Okay, we don't need to talk about it. Who's heard of the business Pampered Chef? Or who's heard of the author Kiyosaki? Rich Dad Poor Dad.
Good book.
Who's heard of this little book?
Which type?
Ever heard of that?
Just Neville.
And Napoleon Hill.
Oh, yeah.
Ever heard of that book?
Think and Grow Rich.
Who's that written about?
Carnegie, yeah,
It was Andrew Carnegie.
the train guy.
The train guy. He was also the one that donated to almost all of the libraries in the public libraries across the country. And the interesting thing about this little group is that they all share one thing in common, and that is that their focus is money. All right? I'm going to talk, the reason why I want to talk about money is because my passion is that we must look beyond money, and we've got to look at what is of value, what is going to be the medium of exchange that is really important. And typically, if Mr. Montoya is producing fantastic food, and remind me your name, I can't. Steve is producing, I don't know, what do you do, Steve, again? Okay, he needs his car. They can create an exchange that is actually of value to both. And we use that money as a medium to create that exchange. Many of you are aware, but I want to drive home this point, that in all of these other books, including Dave Ramsey, this Hayek book, Walter Williams' book, the Making of America book, and in the Miracle, or the 5,000-Year Leap, the principle taught is that when we use the monetary system, or if it gets abused, it can become a tool for slavery. And so that's the principle that I want to read out of the 5,000-Year Leap. And the principle reads this, 27th principle. The burden of debt is as destructive to freedom as subjugation by conquest.
What's the difference?
You tell me.
One is just more subtle than the other.
One's voluntary.
Oftentimes we find ourselves going into debt voluntarily, and at the end game, we find ourselves probably more imprisoned than one who is subjugated.
And the worst thing is, a lot of people believe that they're forced into it, and it's totally voluntary.
That's a true statement. That's a true statement. And here's the point: we have to avoid debt. We have to recognize that this medium of exchange is not held in a strict, continuous value that we can count on. And we are approaching a very unstable moment in history for the currency that we use, which is the American dollar. So my final comment is that if we will make it a priority to listen to that principle and learn the things of value, we will always have the means to provide and take care of the needs of our own families, and be able to be of service to others. And any questions? Anybody have any questions on that or comments on that? Okay, I'll sit down and let's go on and talk about it.